Happy Monday, everyone. Okay, so it's Distant Spirit Week at school and it is Monday. So it is sports day and you are to go outside and spend some time outside or play a game with someone outside. Of course, someone that, you live with or whatever, so that we're practicing social distancing and not making each other sick. So don't gather up a group of people in your neighborhood. Okay, so I have my OU shirt on, and I will post a picture later of what me and the boys, Grayson and Jace, what we're gonna do outside later. So I'll post that on Class Dojo later, and then you guys can share with me too. All right, so it is Others Matter Monday. So my question for you today is, what can you do to help other people in need? So what is something that you can do that might be free or might be, something that you as a kid could do to help other people, to help others that might, be less fortunate? So what is something that you can do? So send me that to my email or on Class Dojo, or if you can find me on Facebook, you can send it and DM me there. All right. So we have been reading The Tale of Despereaux, and we will finish this book this week. We are on chapter 39, and when we left off on Thursday, because I didn't do one Friday since we did our virtual Zoom meeting, but when we left off on Thursday, Migriso and Riscuro had gone up to Princess P's room and woke her up in the middle of the night and held her at knife point and made her get in her fanciest, sparkliest dress, which just happened to be the same dress that she wore the night her mama died. And they are taking her to the dungeon. And right now, Despereaux is asleep on a bag of flour in the kitchen after Mig has chopped his tail off. So he does not know that Princess P is gone yet. So we are going to start chapter 39, and we are going to read through probably 43 today. We'll see how much. I don't want to go too far, and I haven't looked to see how long the chapters are. So probably we'll read through chapter 43. Okay, so chapter 39, Missing. Oh, my cats are fighting. The very young one is fighting with the fat old one. Well, she wants to play, and the old cat doesn't want to play. She's old. She doesn't want to play. So, okay. Well, I think they're done. We can carry on. Chapter 39, Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Riscuro and Migriso had done. And finally, Despereaux awoke. But alas, he awoke too late. I haven't seen her, Louise was shouting. And I tell you, I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Ooh, rubbish. That was one of our vocab words earlier this year. Do you remember what rubbish means? Despereaux sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail, it's gone. Given over to the knife, and where the tail should be, nothing but a bloody stub. And more foul play. Gregory, dead, shouted Cook. Poor old man, that rope of his broken by who knows what, and him lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It's too much. Oh no, whispered Despereaux. Oh no, Gregory is dead? The mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down the shelf. And once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the door of the pantry and saw Cook standing in the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. And beside her stood a tall woman, jangling a ring of keys. That's it, said Louise. All the king's men was down there searching for her in the dungeon. And what they come back with? And who do they have with them? They have the old man, dead. And now you tell me that Mig is missing, and I say, who cares? Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken from right under our noses and queens drop dead, and we can't even take comfort in our soup? And with this, Cook started to cry. Shh, said Louise. I beg you, do not say that word. Soup, shouted the cook. I will say it, and no one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup. And then she began to cry in earnest wailing and sobbing. There, said Louise, and she put a hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. It will be all right, said Louise. Cook brought the hem of her apron up to wipe her tears. It won't, she said. It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away, and there ain't nothing left to live for without the princess. Despereaux was amazed to have exactly what was in his heart spoken aloud by such a ferocious mouse-hating woman as Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm around her shoulder. "What will we do? What will we do?" wailed Cook. And Louise said, "Shh, there." And alas, there was no one to comfort Despereaux, and there was no time, anyway, for him to cry. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For having heard Riscuro's plan, reader, Despereaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon, and being somewhat smarter than Meg, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Riscuro's words. He knew that Meg could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and passed of the weeping ladies. He went to find the king. Chapter 40, Forgiveness. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there, and so Despereaux slipped through a hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council, 13 mice and one most very honored head mouse, sitting around their piece of wood debating an important mouse matter. Despereaux stopped and stood very still. "Fellow honored mice," said the most very honored head mouse, and he looked up from his makeshift table and saw Despereaux. "Despereaux," he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. "Pardon?" said one. "Excuse me?" said another. "I didn't hear right," said a third. "I thought you said Despereaux." The head mouse gathered himself, and he tried speaking again. "Fellow members," he said, "a ghost! A ghost!" And he raised a shaking paw and pointed it at Despereaux. The other mice turned and looked. And there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck like a thin trail of blood. "Despereaux," said Lester, "son, you have come back." Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had only been gone a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. "Son, ghost of my son," said Lester, his whiskers trembling. "I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong." "No," called the most very honored head mouse. "No." "I've destroyed it," said Lester. "I've destroyed the drum. Will you forgive me?" He clasped his front paws together and looked at his son. "No," shouted the head mouse again. "No. Do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community." Lester ignored the head mouse. "Son," he said, "please." Despereaux looked at his father, at his gray streaked fur and trembling whiskers, and his front paws clasped together in front of his heart, and he felt suddenly as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small and so sad. "Forgive me," said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, is, I think, something very much like hope and love. It's a powerful, wonderful thing. And a ridiculous thing, too. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could even forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, here are the words Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father, and he said, "I forgive you, Pa." And he said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop it from breaking completely in two. Despereaux, reader, spoke those words to save himself. And then he turned from his father and he spoke to the whole mouse council. "You were wrong," he said. "All of you, you asked me to renounce my sins, and I ask you, too, to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent." "Never," said the head mouse. Despereaux stood before the mouse council, and he realized that he was a different mouse than he had been the last time he faced them. He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew the things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter. Not at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. "Mice of the council," he said, "we have been paid a visit by a ghost who has told us to repent. We will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, say aye." And the members of the mouse council, there were a tiny bit empathetic chorus of ayes. Only one mouse said nothing, and that mouse was Despereaux's father. Lester Tilling had turned his head away from the other members of the mouse council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he had been forgiven by his son. Okay, and here is a picture of Despereaux and his father. And it says, Despereaux, you've come back. Or son, you've come back. I can't see it. Okay. Chapter 41, The Tears of a King. Despereaux found the king in the P's room, sitting on his daughter's bed, clutching the tapestry of her life to his chest. He was weeping, although weeping really is too small of a word for the activity that the king had undertaken. Tears were cascading from his eyes. A small puddle had formed at his feet. I am not exaggerating. The king, it seemed, was intent on crying himself, literally a river. Reader, have you ever seen a king cry? When the powerful are made weak, when they are revealed to be human, to have hearts, their diminishment is nothing short of terrifying. You can be absolutely sure that Despereaux was terrified. Absolutely, but he spoke up anyway. Sir, the mouse said to the king, but the king did not hear him, and as Despereaux watched, King Philip dropped the tapestry and took his great golden crown from his lap and used it to beat himself on the chest over and over and over again. The king, as I have already mentioned, had several faults. He was nearsighted. He made ridiculous, unreasonable, difficult to enforce laws, and much in the way of miggery, so he was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. But there was one extraordinary, wonderful, admirable thing about the king. He was a man who was able and willing to love with the whole of his heart. And just as he had loved the queen with his whole heart, so too he loved his daughter. Even more than the whole. He loved the Princess P with every particle of his being, and she had been taken from him. But what Despereaux had come to say to the king had to be said, and he tried again. Excuse me, he said. He wasn't certain, really, how a mouse should address a king. Sir did not seem like a big enough word. Despereaux thought about it for a long time. He cleared his throat, and he spoke as loudly as he thought capable of speaking. Excuse me, most very honored head person. King Philip stopped beating his crown against his chest, and he looked around the room. Down here, most very honored head person, said Despereaux. The king, tears still falling from his eyes, looked at the floor, squinting. Is that bug speaking to me? He asked. No, said Despereaux, I am a mouse. We've met before. A mouse, bellowed the king. A mouse is but one step removed from a rat. Sir, said Despereaux, most very honored head person, please, you have to listen to me. This is important. I know where your daughter is. You do? Said the king, and he sniffed. He blew his nose on his royal cloak. Where? He said, and he bent over to look more closely at Despereaux. 1 tear, 2 tears, 3 enormous king-sized tears fell with an audible plop onto Despereaux's head and rolled down his back, washing away the white of the flower and revealing his own brown fur. Sir, most very honored head person, sir, said Despereaux, as he wiped the king's tears out of his own eyes. She's in the dungeon. Liar, said the king, and he sat back up. I knew it. All rodents are liars and thieves. She is not in the dungeon. My men have searched the dungeon. But no one really knows the dungeon except the rats, sir. There are thousands of places where she could be hiding, and only the rats would know. Your men would never be able to find her if the rats did not want her found. Ack, said the king, and he clapped his hands over his ears. Do not speak to me of rats and what they know, he shouted. Rats are illegal and rats are against the law. There are no rats in my kingdom. They do not exist. Sir, most very honored head person, that is not true. Hundreds of rats live in the dungeon of this castle. One of them has taken your daughter, and if you will send, the king started humming, I can't hear you, and he stopped to shout, I cannot hear you, and anyway, what you say is wrong because you are a rodent, and therefore a liar. And he started to hum again, and then he stopped and said, I have hired fortune tellers and a magician, and they are coming from a distant land, and they will tell me where my beautiful daughter is. They will speak the truth. A mouse cannot speak the truth. I am telling you the truth, said Despereaux, I promise. But the king would not listen, and he sat with his hands over his ears. He hummed loudly. Big, fat tears rolled down his face and fell to the floor. Despereaux sat and stared at him in dismay. What should he do now? He put a nervous paw to his neck, and he pulled at the red thread, and suddenly his dream came flooding back to him. The dark and the light and the king swinging his sword, the knight swinging his sword, and a terrible moment when he realized that the suit of armor was empty. And then, reader, as he stood before the king, a wonderful, amazing thought occurred to the mouse. What if the suit of armor had been empty for a reason? What if it had been empty because it was waiting for him? You know me. That was what the knight in his dream had said. Yes, said Despereaux out loud in wonder. I do know you. I can't hear you, sang the king. I'll have to do it myself, said the mouse. I will be in the knight in shining armor. There is no other way. It has to be me. Despereaux turned, and he left the weeping king, and he went to find the threadmaster. Chapter 42. The Rest of the Thread. The threadmaster was sitting atop his spool of thread, swinging his tail back and forth and eating a piece of celery. Well, look here, he said when he saw Despereaux. Would you just look at that? It's the mouse who loved a human princess, back from the dungeon in one piece. The old threadmaster would say that I didn't do my job well, that because you are still alive, I must have tied that thread incorrectly. But it is not so. And how do I know it is not so? Because that thread is still around your neck. He nodded and took a bite of his celery. I need the rest of it, said Despereaux. The rest of what, your neck? The rest of the thread. Well, they can't just hand it over to any old mouse, said the threadmaster. They say red thread is special, sacred, though I, myself, after spent so much time with it, know it for what it is. Well, what is it, said Despereaux. Thread, said the threadmaster. He shrugged and took another bite of his celery. Nothing more, nothing less, but I pretend, friend, I pretend. And what, may I ask, do you intend to do with the thread? Save the princess. Ah, yes, the princess, the beautiful princess. That's how this whole story started, isn't it? I have to save her. There is no one but me to do it. It seems to be that way with most things. No one to do the really disagreeable jobs except oneself. And how exactly will you use a spool of thread to save a princess? Well, a rat has taken her and hidden her in the dungeon, so I have to go back to the dungeon, and it's full of twists and turns and hidden chambers. Like a maze, said the threadmaster. Yes, like a maze. And I have to find my way to her, wherever she is hidden, and then I have to lead her back out again. And the only way to do that is with the thread. Gregory, the jailer, tied a rope to his ankle so that he would not get lost. As the mouse said this, he shuddered, thinking that Gregory and his broken rope, dying, lost in the darkness. Said Despereaux, I will use the thread. The threadmaster nodded. I see, he said. He took a meditative bite of celery. You, friend, are on a quest. I don't know what that is, said Despereaux. You don't have to know. You just have to feel compelled to do the thing, the impossible, important task at hand. Impossible, said Despereaux. Impossible, said the threadmaster. Important. He sat chewing his celery and staring somewhere past Despereaux, and then suddenly he leapt off the spool. Well, who am I to stand in the way of a quest? He said. Roll her away. I can have it. Yes, for your quest. Despereaux put his front paws up and touched the spool. He gave an experimental push forward. Thank you, he said, looking into the eye of the threadmaster. I don't know your name. Hovis. Well, thank you, Hovis. There's something else, something that belongs with the thread. Hovis went into a corner and came back with a needle. You can use it for protection. Like a sword, said Despereaux, like a knight would have. Yeah, said Hovis. He gnawed off a length of thread and used it to tie the needle around Despereaux's waist, like so. Thank you, Hovis, said Despereaux, and he put his right shoulder against the spool of thread and pushed it forward again. Wait, said Hovis. He stood up on his hind legs, put his paws on Despereaux's shoulders, and leaned close to him. Despereaux smelled the sharp scent of celery as the threadmaster bent his head, took a hold of the thread around Despereaux's neck in his sharp teeth, and pulled on it hard. There, said Hovis, when the piece of thread broke and dropped to the ground. Now you're free. You see, you're not going into the dungeon because you have to. You're going because you choose to. Yes, said Despereaux, because I am on a quest. The word felt good and right in his mouth. Quest. Say it, reader. Say the word quest out loud. It's an extraordinary word, isn't it? So small and yet so full of wonder, so full of hope. Goodbye, said Hovis as Despereaux pushed the spool of thread out of the threadmaster's hole. I have never known a mouse who has made it out of the dungeon, only to go back into it again. Goodbye, friend. Goodbye, mouse among mice. And here is a picture of Hovis and Despereaux, and he's saying, you're going back to the dungeon because you choose to, not because you have to. And he's given him that needle to use as a sword, and tied it around his waist. And chapter 43, so this will be our last chapter for today. That night, Despereaux rolled the thread from the threadmaster's lair, along innumerable hallways and down 3 flights of stairs. Reader, allow me to put this in perspective for you. Your average house mouse, or castle mouse, if you will, weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 ounces. Despereaux, as you well know, is in no way average. In fact, he was so incredibly small that he outweighed half of... Oh, sorry. In fact, he was so incredibly small that he weighed about half of what an average mouse weighs. 2 ounces. That is all. Think about it. He was nothing but 2 ounces of mouse, pushing a spool of thread that weighed almost as much as he did. Honestly, reader, what do you think the chances are of such a small mouse succeeding in his quest? Zip? Zero? Nada? Goose eggs. But you must, when you're calculating the odds of the mouse's success, factor in his love for the princess. Love, as we have already discussed, is a powerful, wonderful, ridiculous thing capable of moving mountains and spools of thread. Even with the love and purpose in his heart, Despereaux was very, very tired when he reached the door of the castle kitchen at midnight. His paws were shaking and his muscles were jumping, and the place where his tail should be was throbbing, and he still had a very, very long way to go. And into the kitchen and down the many stairs of the dungeon, and then through somehow, some way, through the rat-filled darkness of the dungeon itself, not knowing where he was going. And oh, reader, when he stopped to consider what lay ahead of him, Despereaux was filled with this icky feeling of despair. He leaned his head against the spool of thread, and he smelled the celery there, and he thought of Hovis and how Hovis seemed to believe in him and his quest. So the mouse raised his head, squared his shoulders, and pushed the spool of thread forward again and into the kitchen, where he saw, too late, that there was a light burning. Despereaux froze. Cook was in the kitchen. She was bent over the stove, and she was stirring something. Was it sauce? No. Was it stew? No. What Cook was stirring was soup. Soup, reader, in the king's own castle against the king's law, right under the king's very nose. Cook was making soup. As the mouse looked on, Cook put her face into the steam rising from the pot and took a deep breath. She smiled a beatific smile, and the steam rose around her and caught the light of the candle and made a halo over her head. Despereaux knew how Cook felt about mice in her kitchen. He remembered quite clearly her instructions to Mig regarding himself. Kill him. The only good mouse is a dead mouse. But he had to go through Cook's kitchen to get onto the dungeon floor, or get to the dungeon door. He had no time to waste. Soon daylight would dawn, and the whole castle would be awake, and a mouse would have no chance at all of pushing a spool of thread across the floor without attracting a great deal of attention. He would have to sneak past the mouse-hating Cook now. And so, with his sticking his courage to the sticking place, Despereaux leaned against the spool of thread and set it rolling across the floor. Cook turned from the stove, a dripping spoon in her hand and a frightened look on her face, and shouted, "Who's there?" And that's where we're stopping for today. Yeah, we should finish this tomorrow. I'll finish it tomorrow for you guys. All right. So, oh my goodness, my hair. I really need a haircut. Man, the coronas are really messing with my hair. Okay, so it is Others Matter Monday, so send me what you think you could do to help others that are in need to my email or to Class Dojo, or you can send it on Facebook. All right, I will see you tomorrow. Bye.